Okay, we are recording. So this is the live stream from My Body Soul Wellness Center for July 18th, 10 a.m. We are pre-recording this because of schedules with our guest speaker today. Today's topic is myofascial release, specifically fascia, and why myofascial release is important. Um, as everybody knows, it is something that's part of my practice. And today we have Dave Noonan. He is a PTA for Inner Circle and Myofascial Release Center in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. He is an expert myofascial release therapist under John Barnes's work. And he is one of the reasons that I got into doing myofascial release at my business. If it
And
wasn't the main reason.
The reason.
If it wasn't for me finding Inner Circle and meeting the owner, Tim, as well as Dave, not only would I still have a very, very painful knee pain that would have resulted into knee replacements as I got older, but also it helped me emotionally. It has helped me with my allergy with cinnamon. And, unfortunately, it assisted me in my son's death. So myofascial release is extremely important. And Dave is our guest to talk about it because I just find the way he explains it is pretty awesome. So since this is a pre-recorded recording, I will be with you all on live stream tomorrow, answering any questions that you have while we watch the video. So without further ado, welcome to Dave.
Hi. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you can be here. And I'm glad you're able to help us out with this because, again, I really do appreciate you. I appreciate Tim, the owner of Inner Circle. And as I've done many times to current clients, as well as on my videos, as you know, I reference Inner Circle whenever I can. And I do a shout out to the facility because it truly has changed my life. So I'm glad you can be here. So let's jump into it because we have some really cool stuff for everybody today. Dave, what would you say to somebody if somebody said, well, what is fascia? What is this new term interstitial? Like, what is it? How would you describe that to our listeners, viewers?
I mean, that would obviously very much depend on who I was talking to, right? So if I was asked that by a patient, I would respond possibly differently than I would respond to a different healthcare practitioner that I was talking to, or a massage therapist, or an energy worker. But generally, the easiest way to explain it is the connective tissue system of the body. The interesting thing about it is that it is one piece of tissue that weaves its way through the body, not only wrapping around, which is the way they usually would talk about it, but interpenetrating every single structure of the body. And when I mean every single structure, we mean down to the very cells themselves. So you can think of it like a three-dimensional spider web that stretches from your head down to your feet and out through to your fingers, from the very micro all the way to the macro. So I have said several times, also written it in articles, not to be hyperbolic, but it is literally the web of life. It's what we are made of.
So with that said, why is it important?
Why would it not be, is the better question. This is a pretty deep rabbit hole. So traditionally speaking, traditional healthcare and scientific research has looked at fascia as packing material. In cadaver labs and dissection labs, you will oftentimes open up the body, and then they will say, scrape away all of that white stuff. Let's get to the important structures. Let's get to the muscles. Let's get to the organs. Let's get to the tendons and the nerve system. What you are scraping away is the fascia. So I think you probably explained it this way before. Anytime you have a piece of chicken or a steak and you peel it apart and you see that translucent webbing or sheen, that's fascia. right? You can think of it like an orange when you slice it and you look at the different, how each section is sectioned out, but then the section itself has that webbing and that fibrous nature to it. That is the fascial system. So if it is under duress, if it has become inflamed because of trauma or injury of any kind, what happens is it literally begins to solidify. We can understand then if I'm wearing, I don't know if you guys remember the old show from the I think it was the 70s or the 80s, but Slim Goodbody. He did like a kids exercise thing, but he would come out and he had this one-piece bodysuit on that had like the heart and the lungs and the stomach and all of this stuff, and he'd work out and all of this to explain things. But think of yourselves in a body stocking, and now if I take that one piece, if I take down by your knee, for instance, and I pull on it, where else is it going to pull? Everywhere, right? And now let's pull the shoulder. Now let's pull the low back. Now let's pull the neck. Let's find all those spots where we're stiff and sore and achy. And now we're walking around like this, wondering why we're in so much damn pain. And it's not surprising when we realize that we're literally being, as John will explain, crushed. We are in a straitjacket, and it is every day tighter and tighter. One more loop on that belt as it tightens down.
So obviously I know quite a bit about this in general, but as you were explaining that, first of all, I don't remember that show in any way. So I'm just going to say, and I'm older than you.
He had like a cool 70s afro too, or something, I think, from what I remember.
I don't remember that show. Clearly my childhood wasn't about being healthy.
Yeah, Slim Goodbody. Yeah.
I'll have to look it up. So
I think it was on before Electric Company or something.
I remember Electric Company. I don't remember this person.
Real quick, let me back up too, just so that we get an understanding. So when we're talking about the fascial system too, it's one piece of tissue, right? But what it is made up of very simple parts. It's 3 parts that make up fascial tissue in any way. There is what we call collagen. You'll see that in a lot of different lotions and stuff. They'll say, "Oh, collagen." But collagen is the firm, it's like the girders or the structural supports. So it's very stiff and tough. It has also a fiber called elastin, and much like the name is, it's elastic, it's stretchy, it allows the opening and closing and the stretching and lengthening of the body. Those 2 pieces, that lattice work that it creates, floats within what we call the ground substance, or in even deeper terms, the extracellular matrix. So it's all floating in this gel, and that's in essence the water that we're made of, right? We're 70% water, 80% water. We're made up, and that's that ground substance, and that is what is beginning to solidify and create problems and pressures onto these structures of the body. And when we talk about myofascial release, that is the structure or the portion of the fascial system that we are attempting to change.
So as you were reading my mind, I was going to bring you back to exactly what that is, because if that's everywhere, and as you and I both know it is, but that's where our water is, right? And that's where our nerves are, and that's where our blood vessels sit through, and just interwoven all the way down to recently seeing around the DNA as well. So it's everywhere.
Well, I will. So that's where so it's a very exciting time to be involved in fascia of any kind, especially fascial research, because people like John Barnes and Ida Rolf and oh God, I'm missing all the other names, but these bodywork visionaries that are out, all the way going back to the father of osteopathic medicine, Andrew Taylor Still. We're talking about the connective tissue system of the body. We're talking about fascia. But John specifically was incredibly intuitive in understanding what was happening under his hands and beginning to investigate it. And he then theorized and hypothesized many processes and what's happening at that tissue level. How are we affecting it? How is it being affected? Yada, yada, yada. that are now being met out by a lot of the new research, because there is an explosion of research currently in the fascial system that is kind of showing all of these things that we've been talking about as body workers is being shown to be so important. But there is still a break between the cellular wall. So I said it interpenetrates every single structure down to the cell. And there are what we call integrins, so proteins that span that cell wall into the nucleus of the cell. And that goes into some much more technical stuff, but how issues with the fascial system and that solidification of the ground substance can literally start to create problems cellularly. And that is what we are thinking and seeing is what is being involved in DNA transcription in cellular functions. But John will say the cytoskeleton, so the girder frame of the cell itself, if we go back to our biology classes, is also fascia. But then I'll talk with Carol Davis, Dr. Davis, and she'll say, nope, I'll argue with them every single time because it's not collagen, elastin, and ground substance, right? And if it's not that, it can't be fascia. So there's always going to be, like in science, these disagreements, but the point being, it's still affecting us down to the cellular level.
Right, right. Well, thanks for clarifying that. I appreciate that so much.
Second clarification, sorry.
No.
The new what you've referenced it several times because there was that firestorm of press coverage in 2018 where they discovered this new organ and they were calling it interstitium because interstitial means in between the spaces between. So interstitial spaces are spaces in between the cells and such.
Gotcha.
So they called it interstitium, and they're like, it's brand new. And then everyone said, no, it's not. And Dr. Guimberg Toe, who I think we're going to talk about, actually wrote a real firebomb letter to the researchers saying that they should have done maybe a better literature review before publishing their supposed findings of this new organ.
Well, absolutely, because as you and I both seen through our own journeys and our own schooling that, citing people appropriately is very important in the academic world. So, absolutely should have done that. And I realize if I'm saying it wrong, then I probably have it spelled wrong on my website. So I'm going to fix that because I thought it was interstitial because I know that's what I hear whenever I call my Jefferson, for my appointments and stuff for breast cancer. They say interstitial, not.
They do because they're talking about the spaces in between, which is a known quantity.
Yeah.
But they took the term interstitial because they were seeing this organ in between the cells, and they go, "What is this? What is that? What's that?" And it had more to do with the new type of laser technology they were using for imaging, from what I've gathered. So it was still good that they were finding it. Where they went wrong was when they said, it's new, it was just, it's a new way of seeing it,
So bringing up the fact about, lasers and stuff like that, we've had this conversation before, mostly because, a lot of people get frustrated when they get MRIs or CAT scans and the doctors come back and say, well, there's nothing wrong with you, and yet somebody's in excruciating pain. Or, in my own journey with my knees for, almost 20 years, I had people say, well, it's just arthritis. It's just arthritis, and arthritis really is terrible. But at the same time, it wasn't just arthritis. Yeah. So we were at a seminar together and could mention the airlines x-rays, could show fascia restrictions. And what was funny was after we left there and I went through the airport, I got dinged on my shoulder area, the actual shoulder blade area, and I was having pain there, some discomfort. Yeah. So it's interesting that right now there's no real medical devices, necessarily that are catching it, but it seems like potentially something, obviously when it comes to machinery and stuff like that, it's looking for certain things. So if lasers and the technology is finally starting to get to where it could see this, then in theory, at some point it should be able to see those pulls that you were talking about, the solidifications.
That's the hope, right? I mean, because a lot of people are frustrated with X-rays and MRIs. It's something that we deal with in our practice all the time. Is people, why am I not getting an MRI? Why am I not going to get? And then when they do get it, they go, oh my God, there it is. Look at it, right? They find arthritis, they find degeneration, they find torn areas, they find all of this. But unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, what we are looking at is proving something after the fact. There's undoubtedly a Latin term for that from philosophy courses, but you're proving it by you know, like you take the picture and they go, see, there it is. But the only reason I'm going to get an MRI or an X-ray is why? Because it hurts, or it looks funny, or it's moving funny, or some sort of symptom is happening. I'm not going in for my weekly MRI to have this constant thing. I wait until I'm in terrible pain. And then we take a picture and we go, oh, there it is. Unfortunately, fascia does not show up on any standard tests. I oftentimes will question, and I've talked to John about this too, and he agrees, but it's one of those, yeah, that's a fun way to think about it, but we have no way to prove it. But I talk about it like, I think that we can see it in the way that we look at black holes. So when astronomers are looking at a black hole, you can't see it, right? Because there is no light that escapes it, therefore it's black, right? The blackest of the black. But what you do see, and how we know black holes are there, are because of the effects in the area, right? So we see the accretion disk, we see the energy blast, we see the gravitational pull, all of that. So I think if we looked at MRIs, and if we had people who understood fascia, understood the importance of it, and understood how that can affect structures, we would possibly start to look at some of our imaging differently. So we would look at the effects that are happening in the area and how is that changing it. But in the end, you don't need a $5,000 test to find out where those pulls are. You just need these guys.
And
the diagnostic skills that were ever invented are right on the ends of our wrists. But we kind of gave up on that, right? Because it's easier to just throw you on an MRI or an X-ray or something and then point at it, cut it, medicate it, and send you on your way.
Right. And cutting creates scar tissue, which, as we know, creates lots of problems. Anytime my scarring on my knees get worked on, you know, I jump through the table.
What are we looking at with scar tissue? We're looking at fascia, right? The difference is, and this is the difference when you see throughout the whole body, because we say connective tissue, and that spans a great distance. That's ligaments, that's tendons, that's areolar tissue, so breast tissue, right? That's the viscera that goes around your organs. All of these are very, very different in terms of structure and function and durability, right? But what you're seeing is a difference in the percentages of those elements, those constituent elements that we talked about. So is it more collagen and less elastin? Then it's going to be really thick and tough like a ligament, right? Is it have a little more elastin? Well, now we're talking like a tendon, because now it's strong, but it can stretch, right? Or it goes all the way to the other side of just loose tissue like breast tissue, which is not specifically that. So with scar tissue, what you're looking at is a laying down of more collagen, those girder-like structures, than elastin. And that's important because it's quick mortar, but we go back to slim good body, right? And that body stocking and those pulls, that scar tissue is like dragging an anchor, right? So I will tell people, it's like, if we go back to Dickens' Christmas Carol, it's like Marley's ghost. We're dragging around these chains, oh, the ponderous chain, all the time, but we don't know, because no one has told us, oh, there it is, you know. But if we can soften those areas of scar tissue, those restrictions, that pressure, that straitjacket can finally start to relax, and that constant inflammation and pain and discomfort can start to minimize, because there's no reason for it to be there anymore, right?
Right. And talking about these, you know, physical restrictions and using your hands, you know, one of the biggest things that you and I both do is we see the person before we even touch them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good intro to bring in the picture that we were talking about.
Let me give a little disclaimer. I'm going to give a disclaimer here to all of my Pilates friends out there. So this is Joseph Pilates, the founder of Pilates. I took a continuing education course in Pilates for rehabilitation because I wanted to see what it was about. It was a great course, a lot of great stuff. I remember very keenly when the instructor put up Joe Pilates' picture, and I went, what are you going to do about all those restrictions, though? And she looked a little bit like a deer in headlights, and I felt kind of like a jerk a little bit because I didn't want to be that guy. Like, oh, well, what about this? And let me show my skills here. But it's a great thing because Joseph Pilates was I think he had a very sickly childhood. So he was under a lot of things, and he rehabilitated himself and developed a lot of very intuitive understanding of the human body. But it shows you as strong and healthy as he was, some of what we see in everyone, right? So what you're talking about when we're doing like a postural assessment, which is what you're saying when we're looking at somebody, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, for example, you have a rotation of the foot down
Oh, hey.
here.
Oh, well, let's double back here for a second because you have this is a great one that we found today because this is not just Joe Pilates early, but also when he's much later, right? I mean, he's an 82-year-old guy looking pretty damn good, right?
Yeah,
But what we
absolutely.
can see is, yes, so what we will usually do with a postural assessment is we're looking at the whole person because, again, you are a whole person. So we have to look at you because that piece of tissue is one thing. Anywhere it pulls is going, just like in a pull in a spider web or a pull in a sweater, is going to affect everything. It can't not. It can't not. It's literally what modern medicine is asking you to believe is for the foundation of your house to crack and shift and your roof to not look funny.
Yeah.
That's what it's asking you to do. And they look at us as more alternative practitioners and this, and they go, oh, well, no, what are you talking about? The roof is the problem. It's shifting. And I'm like, look at this foundation, man. It's just floating there. I mean, come on.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
anyway, as you were here.
Oh, yeah, no. So I tend to start at the feet and work my way up. I don't know if that's what you tend to do when you're looking at somebody from a body perspective. Um, I don't know why I tend to start at the feet. Maybe because I had so many issues with my knees, and when I came into this journey because of waking up in excruciating ankle pain. So I don't know if maybe that's why I gravitate towards the feet versus the head or where others do. But
Sure.
you know, obviously, when I look at the two, I see some similarities between when he was 57 and 82.
Yeah.
But as an 82-year-old, some of them are a little bit more pronounced, So looking at the feet, obviously we have the rotation here, and I'm trying to figure out, I don't know if you can see me making things happen.
I can. I can also see that this guy is literally standing naked in the snow. So we'll just go with that. That's
maybe
Joe for you.
maybe that's part of his health routine to look so good at 82, just get a little cold from time to time. So
Yeah, take through like kind of you'll do a little bit of a assessment here, and then I'll fill in anything that I think is needs to be added here.
Okay, so obviously everybody can see this right foot is drastically rotated outwards. This one, you can see he's actually rotating more on the outside of his foot versus the inside, so the arch is higher on the inside. And then as you move up, because of the rotation of the hips here, you can see a rotation of the kneecap here. You could see a rotation of the kneecap there. A little harder to see the upslip in the hips at this point, and an upslip is just the muscles tightening on the one side, which is pulling the hip up for those that are watching and listening. So a little hard to see here, and most likely because of probably the clothing, since it is a little high-waisted bathing suit. But you can definitely see it in the shoulder. I'm trying to move this around without creating a big annoyance here for everybody, but you could see between these two shoulders, the left shoulder is a little higher, which would indicate that the right hip is a little higher. It doesn't mean every single time, but usually means that. And then when you look at the hands, here, you know, obviously the position of the fingers are different, and that could be restrictions in the fingers, pulling them closer, you know, creating like trigger fingers and things like that. But even if that's not the case, look at the size where the wrists are, as well as if you take a notice here through the arms. Clearly his rib cage on the left is rotating towards the right because the left arm looks like it's a little more forward than the other. And this is just a front view. You know, the side view and the back view is going to show some things everywhere. And then significantly, when we look at the face, look at the pull through the left side, the squint more pronounced in his left eye. The ears, the left ear is a little bit more pushed in versus the right one. So these are some of those restrictions that Dave was talking about. And when we look at the younger version, some of those things are there. The left shoulder is still a little higher. The left side of his face has a little bit more of a squint going on. Can't really see the ear from the position that he's doing. But when we look at everywhere else as we come down in here, you can see that the left shoulder is still pulled forward some, so creating a little bit of that rotation. The hip would have some upslip to compensate, as well as the knees clearly rotated outwards, even though we can't see the feet. Hands, although different than they were, not as fingers pulled in, but still has the right hand arm looks longer from the pull.
Yeah. So all absolutely correct. Several things I'll add to it, which don't really need to be added. But what I usually will do when I'm looking at somebody, and we can all kind of do this now, if you guys can see the picture of Joe here. I'm going to call him Joe because we were totally buds and we used to hang out. But you know how you like when you make someone go blurry, right? So you kind of soften your gaze a little bit. And this is the way John will teach it in the seminars. So you just kind of like sit back and soften your gaze a little bit and choose one of the pictures, either the younger Joe or the older. And just kind of soften your gaze. And don't specifically look anywhere in particular, but just kind of see what pulls your eye. What pattern do you start to see? What areas with where there should be symmetry, is it starting to shift or pull or spread, or what is your eye drawn to? And kind of let that happen. You can do this with family members or friends, or, you know, I mean, not these days in a restaurant because COVID, but, you know, I'm doing it with my servers even, you know, it just happens unconsciously at this point. But you see, like all the things that Bonnie was talking about, you see those pulls. But what I usually will do too, and I'll explain this to patients, is most of what we are dealing with is everything through the center of us. So we always talk about the core, right? And Pilates talked about the core, and that's important. But we're talking about what we call the axial skeleton. So in essence, the rib cage and spine area, not the arms and the legs as much, because it's really what I have always seen over a decade now with everyone is whatever the issues are, they're always finally pulling towards that center, right? Just like that black hole, right? It's these areas in our chest, in our solar plexus, in our belly, a lot of the areas that a lot of Ayurvedic medicine would talk about the chakras, right? These areas of these energy vortices. And those are the areas that it seems to pull towards. And those are the areas that are the most locked down. And what I oftentimes explain to people who are into energy work and things like that are the fascial system works like a crystal, okay? In a very real way. I mean, just how it is made up. When you add water to that type of configuration of lattice work, it creates a crystal. It is a semiconductor, so it is electrically active, and we've seen this in the research as well. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about energy. And if those areas are crushed down, I don't care how much, you know, pranayama you do, or Reiki, or anything else, all of that stuff is awesome. But as John explains many times, it's like shoveling fog. you need to get the pressure off of these structures themselves, because you're taking that copper wire, let's say, that transmits all of this bioenergy through our system, and you're crushing it. You ever crush copper wire when you're trying to plug something in? Doesn't work too well, right? Shorts out. Same thing's happening in your body. So you need to get to that physical stuff first. Everything else is absolutely can start to flow at that point, and then you can really, really dive deep with a lot of the energy work. And then it in the end, just like everything else, it becomes so much more powerful because you're working more the way you're built. But that was just a little aside. But what you see now, which is great, because we see Joe between like 30 years, right? You see in the younger photo, a lot of these things beginning. As Bonnie pointed out, you see the beginning of that left shoulder pulling up, which is really the rib cage is starting to rotate, almost like on its axis. And that's why if you see between his left arm and his right arm, the left is pulled really, really close to his body and the right one is shoved out, right? Mm-hmm. Those hands pull in because his chest is beginning to collapse inwards. As much as it's pulled out because he's strong and he does a lot of exercise, it's still pulling in. So he's constantly fighting that, right? You see the changes in the legs, that wide leg stance he has, which very much narrows as he gets older. Mm-hmm. And then specifically, the biggest thing for me, aside from the face, which was great that you pulled that out, because yeah, that left side looks like it's in a vice right now. If you guys want, while you're watching, actually put a thumb up between and kind of do left, right, this kind of thing, and you'll see the difference. It's two different faces, right? Yeah. But look at his stomach, right? So the line, that piece of tissue that goes right down the center of the six-pack, we call the Linea Alba. You can look, that's supposed to be nice and straight, right? On the abdominals. And what is it? It's literally almost turning into a C curve. Yeah. You see, it's pulling over to the right. And I'm looking more at the younger photo because you see it better just because of some of the shadow. Yeah. He's way too tan when he's 80. And you can see what's happening on the left side of the stomach there. It's crushing all of that tissue over by the oblique and all of that. And then on the other side, completely different, right? So what do you think is happening to all of those organs in there? The intestines, the reproductive organs, the GI tract, your diaphragm, your lungs and heart, because of the change in the diaphragm. All of that is still being crushed too. Our bowels, irritable bowel, incontinence. IBS, absolutely. Yeah, even to the point of autoimmune disorders like, oh, damn it, Crohn's. Even to those points, because it's again, those cellular changes can oftentimes be attributed to the autoimmune issues as well. But all you see then as it shifts over is what happens when you put 30 more years on top of it. So now, when he's 82, that left shoulder is super high, right? The hands are starting to crumple down inwards. The stomach is still all types of messed up. You can still see that same C curve. And it almost looks like he's starting, like you see it a little bit on the younger side, but in the older side, it almost looks like he's trying, like sucking it in. Not sucking it in, but yeah, in some ways, but almost like squatting, like about to sit down, like the rotation of the hip and that. Well, yeah, so that's probably due to some of his own understanding of the core and his work with like pelvic tilts and getting that they always talk about getting an indentation by rolling the hips back and jamming the low back in, which is good to a point. Yeah. But I just love this picture because I think everyone can see now when you point it out, they go, oh my God. And this is a guy that spent his whole life studying exercise and taking care of himself. And he has these issues. So what do you think your issues are, right? You have these same things and they are correctable. You just have to get to see somebody and do the work. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned about the energy flow, because obviously Mind Body Soul, I do energy work, and, we try and incorporate energy work within the chakras as well as energy healing and things like that. And, a lot of times, as we've had this conversation before, the way people perceive their body, they see it as a separate entity from
energy from life, you know, that it's the physical body, it's your mind, and it's your soul, and that none of those intertwine, when
Mm,
truly it's all connected. Our
yeah.
soul is weaved within the body. Our mind processes physical pain, emotional pain, even in some ways, you know, how we look, you know, that, you know, the way that your mind might see your body. For those that actually see these kind of pulls without understanding why it's happening, you could think that you know, you're completely ugly and disformed, when we're all walking around like that. Even my shoulders have that. And today, with the kids nowadays starting off on cell phones and iPads at such a young age, we're seeing more and more, Dave and I and the body workers of the world, you know, are truly seeing more and more of the shoulders coming in on itself, you know, doing one of these, you know, crushing the chest cavity, you know, and they wonder why the kids not only have back pain at a younger age, but also, you know, what is that going to do for their sleep patterns? You know, they talk about, you know, the blue light and not doing that, but what else is it physically doing, you know? So when you mentioned about the energy, you know, because the body needs energy and it's everywhere, if it is, you know, pulled and restricted, it's not getting past there. And I've had, I'm sure you have as well, but I've had people who have been treated for, what's the word I'm looking for? It's out of my mind right this moment. The disorder, but it's where the legs stop working.
Neuropathy?
No,
I mean, stop working, like paralysis?
well, not the paralysis aspect, but it's oh
Restless leg.
no, well, I mean, that's going to be part of it, because that's pinched and not getting
Okay.
there, and all that stuff. It'll
Sciatica.
come. It'll come. Well, sciatica is, all of it is a thing, but no, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. So bear with me. It'll pop in my head, and then I'll
Yeah.
blurt it out to everybody. But I treat with people who have, you know, certain physical disorders, especially in the legs and the
Mhm.
hips. And when I treat them, they'll say, it just felt like I peed myself.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and it's funny because I've had that feeling when I get treated.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, when the hips are so jammed up and the fluid finally breaks through these restrictions, it can feel like you peed yourself,
A
you
warm
know?
rush down the leg. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because all that fluid and all that energy and all of that just went through the system.
Yeah.
And if somebody can experience that just one time, I think that gives a big picture of what the body workers that do myofascial release and specifically work on the fascia could give a great example for. Like, that is it. When you feel that running through your body, it is a weird feeling. It really
Yeah.
is. But it's
Well,
an
there's so many feelings, and that's what's so difficult with most body work, but especially myofascial release, because I have really found it to be kind of the hub. So everything else that's out there is all excellent and very helpful, but I found MFR is the hub because I can explain every other thing through that lens, and they all fit into this paradigm that John created. Um, but yeah, I think so it's kind of like, you know, poets have been spending the last 6,000 years or whatever trying to explain love, right? But you can read a sonnet and you can talk about love, and you can all of this. You can even talk about the scientific aspects of it until you have experienced it. And then you spend the rest of your life trying to find words that are appropriate for it. So it's kind of like that. So when you experience this work, it finally goes, oh yeah, okay, totally, I understand what you mean. But up until then, it sounds, some is just, I don't know what you mean, I don't know what you're talking about. So so it's hard for just words to explain it, but it can at least hopefully open someone's eyes. The second point I would make is, yeah, when I say everything is connected, and when we say everything is connected in MFR especially, I mean everything. We do make these little partitions between for mind, body, soul, wellness, right? We act as if these are separate things, and then we even say the mind body connection, as if it's, oh well, now it's the connection, but meanwhile you somehow walked across the room just with your legs. Like, I don't, like, someone walks in a room, you know exactly how they're feeling without, they haven't said a single thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't tell me that the emotions and the mental state and the physical state are not intertwined. And you definitely can't tell me that because I've experienced it. I've experienced it on the table myself. I have also experienced it multiple times, again and again and again, treating people. I see how these physical restrictions are mental blocks. They are our judgmental sides. They are the areas that close our hearts off. They are our emotional traumas. They are our physical traumas. They are all of it, because you cannot have one without the others. They're just, when I said about energy work, it's like shoveling fog. It's just because it's a different aspect of it. It's more subtle. It's more refined.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to get through some of the big stuff before you can get to that subtle, refined stuff. But a lot of times I think we want to be able to bypass that.
Mm-hmm.
People will even talk about it as in the spirituality world as spiritual bypassing. You just want to be there, because by being there means you're not here. Because here means, in French, as the French say, I'm a piece of shit, right? But I don't want to be there. But where else are you going to be, right? So in a lot of ways, I think we try to bypass some of our traumas and our stuff because we play act at, oh, well, I'm going to go and, I know a great Reiki person and I'm going to do that. Okay. And you're also going to deal with, like, you're literally bent over and it looks like you need a walker right now. Reiki is not going to change that. Reiki can do a lot of stuff. It's not going to change that.
Mm-hmm.
Is not, because it's like you're trying to send electricity through that crushed copper wire. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Right. So yeah. And when I mean everything's connected, I mean it. Everything is connected.
Yeah. And so as we were talking, I was trying to decide where to go next, because we're talking about spirituality, we're talking about energy, we're talking about all these things. And there's a great video, as we both know, regarding this polar bear. And but I feel like before I show that, I want to show a couple minutes of like what truly the fascia looks like, in
Yeah.
real life. So Dr.
Yeah.
Gimberto, I'm probably saying it wrong because I get my words all weird when not.
Jean-Claude Guimberteau. He
Say
is, so just as a real quick, and you can find this stuff, it's excellent because just the artistry of it alone. I have his textbook, and just the pictures you can literally blow up and put on your wall. I mean, Bonnie has one in her treatment office of fascia just blown up because it's just beautiful to see. But this is what we're talking about, because he's a French hand surgeon that began to realize that his training and what he's supposed to know about the body wasn't mixing with what he was seeing every time he cut into somebody. So, as great scientists do, real scientists, not just technicians, but real visionaries, he said, let me get a little camera, a little endoscopic camera, and he started to film, with their permission, of course, fascia in a live person. Now, most of this is going to be, you're going to see where it's, because he was doing a lot of things with the tendons and work through the forearms, because he's a hand and wrist surgeon, right? But you'll see what I'm talking about with that lattice work, okay? And as you see this, you're going to see what look like spaces. Those are not empty spaces. That is the ground substance that we're talking about, right? That is what can start to solidify. So imagine, as you watch this, what would happen if that area that was all glistening and dewdrops and all of this, all of a sudden we poured glue into it. And then think about how your wrist is going to move when that happens. But take a look.
Or cut into it with scar tissue,
And I think this is an excerpt from his one of his first films. It was called Strolling Under the Skin.
It is.
Yeah.
So anybody wants to see the full, I think it's like a 20, 30 minute, maybe.
Yeah, he has the DVDs for sale. You can check out. You can get his book too. It's the Architecture of Human Fascia. It's a beautiful book. I mean, it is a textbook, but still, take a look.
All right, so let's pull that up real quick here. Actually, share the desktop because that seems to be.
Oh, there it is.
Way. We're gonna full screen this.
with rings that reinforce the solidity like an articulated bamboo stem. Rings that reinforce the solidity like an articulated bamboo stem. Transparent sails, dewdrops.
They can still hear me, yes?
Travel along
Yes.
these pearly structures, and you notice the same fractal arrangement everywhere. Large fibrils endlessly punctuated by other smaller ones. The tissue continuum is total. The marriage homogeneous.
Right
Cell
there.
arrangement completely fractal.
You see
A
those
world of fire
spaces. They
below
are not
plane.
spaces.
The human body would seem to be one and the same tissue that has differentiated over time,
There.
whose basic
One and the
organizational
same
structure.
tissue that is
Yet this
differentiated over
organizational
time.
framework supporting life must have its
It
inherent
means
code
it's
of
all
behavior.
the same thing. But look at that. It's just that.
How are these structures organized? How do they resolve and move? And what
There's a pause. I don't know what it's doing. Hold on. It's still moving. Let's see. If I pause and start again.
what
There we go. Something's going on with the video. We'll just play it without sound so everyone can kind of see it. Oh, nope. It's not even moving. It's image.
Oh, that's okay. We saw, but you guys could see that, unfortunately, we didn't really see as much when it was moving. I don't think we saw that.
I think it was more towards the beginning, but yeah, because we're at that point
That's
where
okay.
it's not going to show it, but...
What you are seeing here is literally what we were talking about. You're seeing that, now this is at a microscopic level, okay, what we call endoscope. So this is very, 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 very close. So if you opened it up, it would not look exactly like this. This is very close up, right? So again, when you open up the steak or the chicken and you pull the pieces apart, that's what you're seeing. And if you went down with a microscope, you would see this, but it is that lattice work. And it is not a lattice work like you have in your fencing. It is not linear, okay? It is not straight lines. John will always put up a picture of it's like a beautiful, like scenic park with a lake and trees and all of this beautiful stuff. And he'll say, do you see any straight lines? He goes, oh, there's one. And he points out a little park bench, you know, because we made that. And linear lines are great. Look right there. That is not linear. That is what they're calling that fractal nature. And fractals means, it's like if you looked at a leaf, right? If you look, you take the leaf all the way down to its smallest patterns, those patterns repeat larger and larger and larger. And you see that throughout nature, right? The same thing with us too. But those fibrils that you see are literally interchanging. Unfortunately, we couldn't see, I don't know if it's even in this section of the video, but as the person moves, those fibrils shift and they'll move, and this one will come over here, and this, constantly adapting to whatever pressures are placed on it. And think about how many things you do in a day. Your entire body is doing that, is shifting, changing. And now, if we pour glue in that, what's happening?
I remember in one of the videos, and can you see my mouse moving?
Yep.
Okay, so I remember, you know, seeing these videos quite often, but this particular section here is one of the ones that should be gliding very effortlessly. And I remember on the ones that have a little bit more substance in the corners of them, they're the ones that tend to are stretching until they finally break apart, when it should just be an easy glide across all these tension tendrils. So
it can, yeah. And
yeah.
again, this stuff is all very, very new. I mean, Guimberto didn't really start a lot of this until early 2000s, and just recently released the textbook and things like that. So this is still very new. They're still trying to understand some of the physics and all of that behind it. But one of the best stories I have, which I don't think he would have a problem with sharing because he said it before, but John had envisioned what he was feeling under his hands, you know, and he started doing this stuff in the 70s and early 80s and began teaching. So he's been doing it a long, long time. And what he was feeling under his hands, he says, when he finally saw this video come through, he just sat there and he said tears started to come because he said, that's what I saw. that's what I saw. He saw it in his mind's eye because of what he was feeling, you know, and he went with that. And from that has now blossomed into this thing. And thankfully is getting his just desserts now, because he was the one that was out there taking a real licking, saying these things, and getting a lot of heat for it because it went against the grain. And that's the new science for you.
Yeah.
We talked about MRIs before, same thing. I don't know if you guys know, but the physician that developed the idea about MRIs and how they would work was almost laughed out of medicine. So there you go.
Yeah, everything is, you know, controversial until it's not, you know,
Exactly.
so especially when
Exactly.
it's not going against the people who are making the most money at the time. So as you were saying about John and feeling, you know, that comes back to emotions and feel, right? Not
Yeah.
just visually, you know, the physical stuff. And there's this great video that John typically shows in quite a bit of his seminars about
I
a
think
polar
he's, yeah, I think he shows it in unwinding first because of what we're talking about. Yeah.
right, which is fascinating. So I'm going to show the video first and then we'll discuss it. But, you know, with him showing it within the unwinding class, it is because of what's actually happening. So let me get that one and hopefully it works through the whole 2 minutes because it
Fingers
should.
crossed. Here we go. This one's gonna work.
Yeah, well, and clearly, hold on, I gotta get it back up again. Clearly, let's see. Okay,
We're good. We're good.
let's see. I'm gonna share my screen again, and then we're gonna come to our bear. All right.
Go for that one.
So what's happening is they're not coaching him. They are a medical team, so they're tracking them. They want to weigh them, take some things from the bear. So it's not a death thing, just so everybody knows. So as John would say, you know, the bear's running, and this person's about to train the bear so they can do what they need to do for medical reasons.
See these, the pads there, it's sort of like non-skid material, and it's all sort of rough, it's not really smooth. It helps them get better traction on the ice.
And we learned a little bit about polar
That's
bears,
almost
so I'm
like
going to let it run.
sandpaper. And of course, big claws for ripping, breaking into seal layers, but he hasn't started to really chip his teeth.
I don't know why it keeps loose. Oh, there we
No,
go.
it's here we go.
Watch that animal after he finishes convulsing. You'll see, because he's aware of the fact that we're all around him, and it's a very stressful experience for an animal like a polar bear.
I don't necessarily agree with what they're saying there. That might be true, but personally, I feel the bear is unwinding, you know, working through the trauma of running, stopped in motion of running because it was tranked. And now it's getting that trapped energy out from that motion of running and not being able to fulfill. So even though the guy's saying that, it's pretty cool what the rest of the bear does, but I just wanted to put that out there for everybody to think about leading into our topic.
And after he settles down, and then he'll start doing a couple of deep breaths, and then he'll breathe really nicely. And look, here he goes. See how he's breathing in now? See, so even though it looks a little unpleasant, it lets off all that stress, and he then is able to relax and sleep the thing off.
So the bear's still trying to run out, trying to finish that motion. And then when it takes those breaths, how many times have we, you know, talked about breathing? None of us breathe appropriately. Nobody takes breaths, you know, when they've had a traumatic situation. And so I think they just keep repeating that a
Yeah,
little bit.
that's the powerful image there.
It really is. So let me get us back to us here.
Ah,
So hey,
hey!
so I try to explain to people in a lot of ways about how trauma affects us emotionally and energetically, and this, as we know with animals are always in the moment. They're never thinking about tomorrow or next week, and they don't think about what happened in the past. They might, if they're in a similar situation where there was danger, because they sense that area, that those sites as danger as we would, for triggers and stuff. But they're not stuck in the past. They're not stuck in the future. And when they have a traumatic experience such as this, or just they were in the motion of doing this, it's no different if it was trying to climb a tree and it got tranked. It would probably still be trying to climb the tree, because it's that whole stop, right? So do and stop. And that's a perfect example of that. And, what I've seen just in day-to-day life for myself, if I'm in that motion and I get stopped, I don't finish that motion. I'm just stopped because I'm a person. And I start to think, well, why did that person stop me? And where was I going? And now I've completely interrupted that motion. And, obviously we could talk about many reasons as to why that's so important. But back to Dave, like, how would you describe what's happening in that picture?
Yeah. So as you said, animals are much more in the moment, right? Mainly because I think in the end, even structurally, they don't have the blessing or the curse of the big brain and all the cognitive stuff that we like to overlay all of the things that happen. But when you were just describing it there, I wouldn't go as far with that, because these things that we're seeing, especially with the bear and with trauma, are not on any level of a conscious awareness. So it's not even I'm doing something and I get stopped. It's literally what we have found, and you guys can check out Dr. Peter Levine, Levine, wrote a book called Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma. Very accessible book. It's not at all, like a psychological textbook or anything. There's also a great one that came out a couple years ago, The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who actually built off Levine's work. He references it and takes it even farther. But what we are seeing is that on the level of what we call the mammal brain or the reptile brain. So our brains have in essence evolved over time, right? And now we have this beautiful overlay of this cerebral cortex that has all of these fancy gizmos that we play with now on our smartphones and everything else, right? With our distractions. But the mammalian brain and the reptile brain, which are those lower brains, and that's where a lot of like things like reflexes and things like that are stored. It's on that level, and that is not a level that we have necessarily conscious activation of. So what you're seeing with the bear and with trauma, and what's good that we're now starting to talk about what we call trauma-informed care, meaning that an understanding of the effects of trauma, not just, oh, well, get over it, walk it off, but the true structural and the physical changes, the actual changes in the structure of the brain from trauma, and how that then affects everything else going forward from there. So it's good that we're starting to actually start to pay attention. But what we're seeing is when the bear is being chased down to be tranked and just checked out, make sure that he's doing okay, because they're veterinarians and all of that. He doesn't know that. So he's going off the fight or flight response, as we all know, right? So if I can either fight it or I can run from it. But what if I can't do either, right? What if I'm in an abuse situation or childhood traumas or things like that? I can't fight it and I can't run from it. So what do? There's actually a third response that we don't often talk about. It's called the freeze response. And what that means is you literally freeze, you play dead. John will explain it as the body, in an effort to protect itself because something is too intense, it will literally pull the feeling intelligence right out of the body. okay? It will disassociate at the moment of trauma to allow you to withstand the ordeal, okay? Now, what happens when that feeling intelligence comes back in? When that freeze response begins to what we call thaw. That's what you start to see when the danger had passed and the bear started to come. It began to discharge the enormous hurricane of energy that's required to freeze the system, right? So Dr. Levine will give the idea on the savannah of a gazelle drinking at a stream, and all of a sudden a cheetah comes, and this gazelle takes off. But the cheetah is much faster and overtakes it. At that moment, the gazelle is going at full blast and is stopped dead. And literally has to play dead. Now, hopefully it survives, but even if it's not, the feeling intelligence is out here, so it can withstand that intense pain that it's going under. But
so similar to checking out when you check out.
Checking out is all of those phrases that we use are very real things.
Mm-hmm.
So that feeling intelligence out here, when it finally can come back in, we see the resolution of that. And that's where you see, as Bonnie was explaining, the bear is going through those motions of resolving that episode, okay? John will explain it. It's like the movie of your life is going by, the frames. And all of a sudden, when trauma happens, we cut out one of the frames. And now it makes no sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's no middle part now. And that, what we see even in brains, like I said with Vanderkolk's work, the brains themselves, they can't process it, because a traumatic incident, if you're talking to a therapist or something about it, it makes no sense. It's jumbled. There's no beginning, middle, and end. And therefore, the body is constantly replaying that. And what we see is that restriction beginning to set in. So there's the physical response from trauma. Something hits you, blunt force trauma, you're going to tighten up around it. But you're going to keep tightened up around it so that that fist is not constantly hitting you. The truck that you saw coming in your rear view is not constantly blasting into you. Your body is stuck, very much frozen, as we call it in MFR, in that moment in time. And your subconscious is going to do everything possible to stop you from going into that thing that represents fear, pain, trauma, all of it. You do not want to go into those dark corners.
Mm-hmm.
So in the therapeutic environment, when you trust the therapist and you trust yourself, more specifically, to what we call let go or let the brakes off, the body will begin to spontaneously go into some of that. At times, it doesn't have to be as volatile as the bear was. It can be. But those frozen areas begin to thaw and melt, and that stuff comes up to the conscious surface. And in a safe environment, the body can re-experience it. It can put that missing film back in. So now the film has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Mm-hmm. And then just like a memory, oh yeah, that time, it makes sense. And that's why we don't respond to memories the same way we do to traumatic events in the past. So.
Yeah, and we talked about the physical aspect, the physical trauma. But a lot of people don't realize that emotional trauma, as I was talking about last week, is just as equally important, if not worse, than physical trauma. And I know a lot of people that have been in abusive relationships would say that the verbal abuse was worse than the physical, because the physical they can heal from. The verbal ones rattles in our mind over and over and over again, continuing the pattern and continuing our thought process about it. And a perfect example, just to give, I love giving examples. When Morgan died, upon finding him and touching him to see if he was alive, once I knew he was dead, because I did, and I can tell you guys personally that, as well as I'm writing a book about it, so you guys can read it too in the future. But once I knew he was dead, I instantly dropped to the floor, but then I instantly got up because my mind kicked into gear. I need to call 911. I need to call Dave, that Dave, because we were dating too. So yeah, there's a little personal relationship right there. But my mind turned into, these are the things I have to do, because in this traumatic event, even though it was emotional, it didn't hit me. Like, it wasn't like I got hit by a truck. It wasn't like I got hit in a car accident. It wasn't like I got trained by something. Physically, it was all emotional and mind. And when I dropped to the floor and then got up because reaction mode, got to do these things, that moment of time that I denied myself to be able to drop to the floor and feel what I was going through in that moment caused so much emotional pain for me that I didn't even realize it, you know, like how much it was holding me back, how much I had a hard time breathing, how much I had a hard time navigating within the world, because unfortunately in that moment of time, you know, I had my own business and I didn't have PTO time, and I was living paycheck to paycheck. And so, as most of us do, especially now, you know, COVID, but, you know, I didn't have the time to properly grieve in that moment for my son because I had to be in survival mode. I had to do what I needed to do. And so, because I was grieving in a world that was not grieving, that moment of time that I denied myself really affected me physically, emotionally, and mentally. And it wasn't until I had a treatment. Dave usually is my MFR therapist to this day. Dave was treating me, and I went back to that moment of time. And I felt what I needed to feel. In that moment, I just wanted to stay by his side. And that's it. To stay in that moment, to feel his body without feeling it, because trust me, anybody who's touched a dead body, it does not feel good, and it's something that gets stuck for a while. But I wanted to be in that space, in that death space, and I denied myself that. I've learned to cry when I cry, so it helps with the emotional pain. So, you know, ignoring even just that trauma, that emotional trauma, really kind of set the course for a lot of things. Not only his death, but the denial of certain things for myself. That through MFR and through touch, from a therapist, that they don't necessarily have to be skilled. I've had some great, and I know Dave has too, has some great experiences with people that are not in the profession, but they hold the space so that way you can feel safe and you can explore what you need to explore. John does a patient therapist healing seminar. And in that, you know, it's patients. It's not, and they may or may not have treatments, you know. And I've had some pretty profound memories and falling from complete strangers that don't do the work at all. So it's not about just being an expert. The expert, in my opinion, comes from creating the space that someone needs to let go, because we're all walking around guarded. We're all walking around, I need to protect myself. I can't let somebody see this side of me. I can't forgive myself. I can't. And this whole thing just then ripples amongst ourselves. So, you know, crying, I cry in the middle of public. And I used to not, don't get me wrong. My ex-husband said that I was an ice queen and my heart was nothing but ice, which wasn't true, but yet because I didn't cry. But then I didn't have really anything to cry about, you know, at least that affected me that way. Now, obviously I do. There's triggers regarding my son. So that emotional pain is just as terrible. And it gets stuck in there too. The script, as Dave was talking about, the movie script, you know, that got snipped, that didn't play out. So sometimes because it's emotional, I know a lot of people don't understand that. You know, we all know that one person that seems to cry at the drop of a dime, you know, and everyone would say, why are that person always crying all the time? You know, what kind of life did they have? You know, what are they sad about? Are they sad like in this case where I started crying about my son and thinking of that moment of time? Some of us are walking around with that pain all day, every day, and it starts to affect physical when we already have, as we saw um, with the photo, we already have the restrictions, and then now we have the pain. We might not have had the pain. I mean, how many people, Dave, have you seen come in and say, I've done it, and I know he's going to say at least Bonnie has. I don't understand. I just woke up in pain one day.
No, that's every single person. I will just real quick back up and say, yeah, by no means is emotional trauma somehow less or anything than any other than a truck hitting you. My point more, though, is that you have been recently really pushing that, you know, not either or, but and.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a better way to start to envision and have a perspective on you as a person. Emotional traumas, physical traumas, mental traumas, there is always a reflection in all of the other aspects because they are not something different. They are just aspects of it. So emotional traumas, like Morgan, or like someone who, let's say, had issues as a child with molestation, and there was no actual physical trauma, nothing to create actual trauma, I think they're probably going to be pretty affected physically as well because the body has to try to, it has to, if those issues, if those traumas are not able to be completed, as we saw with the bear, and that's really what causes the problem. If we were able to finish that process, and we've seen this, we would not have the same post-traumatic issues as we do. It's when that process is interrupted. It's stopped, even if it's stopped for good intentions, like anesthetics given at, you know, accidents and things like that. That is interrupting the process, but you better give me the damn anesthetics if I'm in an accident, right?
Yeah.
But if it's interrupted, once it's completed, though, and so if it's not able to be completed, then the whole body has to cordon that area off. It has to, so it starts to literally, it solidifies around itself in an effort to wall that in.
To protect itself.
It's protecting. So the things that are hurting you are not necessarily your enemy. And I say it all the time, pain is not your enemy. It's your friend, but you have to listen to it. You can't be in the relationship where you keep taking and taking and taking from the body, and then when it says anything, you tell it how much a piece of garbage it is and why it failed you. It's been doing it the whole time. And just like when I wake up in the morning and, oh, I just did this, I didn't do anything. Sure, except you were driving in your car for the last 30 years and the engine light's been on and you put masking tape over it. And the car still drove because you told it to do it. And it's a great car and it's going to do it just like your body until it can't. And then you break down on the side of the road and you go, just yesterday it was driving fine. Now, please heal me up quick so I don't have to face any of this stuff so I can get back to my distractions and not have any cause to reflect on what I am being as a human being. And in the end, that is the healing process. If we can break any of this down, and that's why when you talk to MFR therapists, they're going to talk very differently because they've been through this as well, okay? John always says you can never take a patient farther than you've been willing to go yourself. And it is important because what we are really talking about is becoming aware. We are talking about becoming aware and becoming present with ourselves. And what we are trying to do with healing interventions is not take away pain. In some ways, I don't even care about that. I say this sometimes to certain patients if they understand what I mean. I say, I don't care about your symptoms. I care about where we're going, okay? Because someone, I forget what therapist said it, but myofascial release is not about feeling better. It's about getting better at feeling. Because if you are being in a good relationship with your body, then when it asks for something, you give it so that it can be there for you. Just like any good relationship. If you talk to your wife or your husband all the time about what have you done for me lately, it's probably not going to end too well. There has to be a give and take, and your body is no different. So when it's giving you pain, it's trying to talk to you, but you won't listen. So it starts to yell.
Yes.
So listen.
Yes. Starts to yell with additional pain or dysfunction. You know, for me, I 100% believe that I got breast cancer because of losing Morgan. Every time I heard his name, every time I said his name, I could feel that tightness around my chest cavity right near my heart. Every time. I didn't realize it at first. And by the time I did, it was a little too late. So, you know, these are things that, again, as Dave said, we have to listen to our body when it's making noise, just like our cars. We could take it to the mechanic when it's making a noise and it might not do it, but at least we heard it and we had made an attempt to fix it. But our bodies, we tend to ignore all the time.
The only thing I will add to that too, just because I think it's important for people, because we always like to look for the thing that happened. So whether it's a physical trauma or what did I do that caused this, right? Because if that's it, then if I can never have to do that again, if I never weed in my garden, then my back won't hurt, right?
Yeah.
It forces us to not look at the continuum of us, because speaking, you're very open about it. Your massive trauma with Morgan absolutely sets up a cascade failure. However, what did that rib cage and shoulders and neck and all of these areas look like for decades before? Right? You remember when you came into therapy in the very beginning, you started to get that, why am I getting that hump that I see the ladies get?
I know, I
right?
feel like I'm getting it again because I'm not doing my exercises.
And then once we started working through all of these areas, what did we start to see? That started to shift. But what was that pressure doing to set up until, you know, I always say we're always bringing the body we have to the next trauma, whatever that might be. If it's a fall, if it's a surgery, if it's a terrible travesty, right? But we're bringing the body we have. The better our body is, the more resilient, the more it can take that hit and keep going. But if you're already sapped to a point and you're going down. You're going down. So even with the most intense things, like what Bonnie is talking about, don't lose yourself completely in that. Look at the continuum of where are you and what has your body been trying to tell you, and how can you help that?
Yeah.
How can you move it towards your goal?
It's part of the and situation. I'm not doing,
there you go.
You know, or this, you know, looking for that one, as I always try and bring back, as well as Dave. I know Dave says it a lot too anymore, but it's the and, you know, it's not how you slept last night. It's and how you slept last night. It's all these things. You know, so when we break it down, it's the collective umbrella. It's not just the handle. So, which is why I wanted to bring Dave on, because I love how he speaks. I love when he calls me out on certain things. I do, because even though I might be saying that exact same thing, I like how he says it, because that speaks to other people that maybe when they listen to me, they're kind of like, what? She went off a little bit over here, you know, where Dave brings it back, and he's very articulate when it comes to the science and all that stuff, because that's how Dave works in a lot of ways. So, and I want to say this. I know I said it last week on the video for emotional pain. I love that you said Morgan's name several times. I really appreciate that. And I love that you did it, you know, recently with somebody else, where you took that information from last week and applied it to somebody else who had lost somebody that they love as well, and used that person's name. It is extremely important, and it helps in a lot of ways with that continual care and that continual growth and the continual of our traumas, you know, no matter where that trauma stems from. So we are a little over. So
sorry, guys.
No, I think it only worked out to be like maybe 10, 15 minutes tops. But I appreciate you joining the call, Dave. And while everybody's watching this, obviously, if any of you had questions, I would have answered them. So next week, we're going to have another guest speaker. We are having Iris, who is a shaman, and she's going to be talking about her business, shamanism, and why shamanism is helpful within our bodies as well. So as you guys know, with Mind Body Soul Wellness Center, it's a lot of different modalities that treat the mind, body, and the soul. All it, you know. So that'll be next week, and I'm going to try and do some more live people. So if you guys have anybody watching has anything that's similar regarding Mind, Body, Soul, and you want to reach out to me, you know, I'll talk to you about getting you at it. But in the meantime, thank you, everybody, and until next week. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Great time.